My name is Lily Smith, and what I'm about to share with you changed everything I thought I knew about life, death, and eternity. 3 years ago, on what began as an ordinary Tuesday afternoon, I experienced something extraordinary. I died for 12 minutes and 52 seconds after being thrown from my horse. What I witnessed during those moments between life and death has left me forever changed. I've hesitated to share this story, not because I'm afraid people won't believe me, though many won't, but because the experience was so sacred, so profound, that human language feels woefully inadequate to describe it. But I feel compelled to tell you what happened that day and what I saw when I crossed over to the other side. The truth I discovered is too important to keep to myself. It was one of those perfect October afternoons, the kind where the sunlight filters through the autumn leaves, creating a golden glow over everything. I had gone riding at Hillcrest Stables, where I'd been taking lessons for years. My horse that day was Artemis, a spirited Appaloosa I'd ridden many times before. We started with a steady walk around the perimeter of the property, then transitioned into a comfortable trot. Everything was going beautifully. The crisp air filled my lungs, and for a moment, all my worries disappeared. I remember thinking how peaceful it was, how connected I felt to everything around me. But peace can shatter in an instant. As we approached the western field, something spooked Artemis. Maybe a snake or a sudden movement in the bushes. I'll never know for sure. She reared up without warning, her front hooves pawing at the air. I tried to regain control, using all the techniques I'd learned over years of riding, but it happened too fast. "Whoa, girl, easy." I pulled back on the reins, trying to calm her, but she was beyond listening. I remember the terrifying sensation of being thrown backward, the reins slipping from my fingers as I lost my seat. Time seemed to slow as I flew through the air. I had just enough awareness to think, "This is going to be bad," before my head struck the wooden fence post. There was a sharp crack, the sound of my riding helmet splitting on impact, and then everything went black. Or at least, that's what should have happened. But instead of darkness, something extraordinary occurred. The moment my head hit that post, I felt a strange sensation, like being pulled through water, but without the resistance or the wetness. I wasn't unconscious. In fact, I was more conscious than I'd ever been. The first thing I noticed was the silence. The panicked neighing of Artemis, the distant shouts from other riders who had seen my fall. All of it simply stopped. I felt strangely weightless, like gravity had suddenly become optional. Then came the realization. I was looking down at my own body. I saw myself lying there by the fence, motionless, my riding helmet cracked nearly in half. My body was sprawled at an unnatural angle, one leg twisted beneath me, my face already beginning to swell and turn purple where it had struck the post. Blood trickled from my nose and ears, forming small dark pools on the ground. But I felt no pain, no fear, just an overwhelming sense of curiosity and wonder. How could I be looking at myself? It didn't make sense, yet it felt completely natural. 2 other riders, Jessica from my Thursday lesson group and an older man I didn't recognize, were racing toward my body. I wanted to tell them I was fine, that there was no need to worry, but I couldn't communicate with them. I was simultaneously there and not there. "Help! Someone call 911!" Jessica was shouting as she jumped off her horse and ran to my side. Lily, can you hear me?" I could hear her perfectly, but my body couldn't respond. My physical lips didn't move. My physical eyes remained closed. I watched as the man checked my pulse, his expression grim. "She's not breathing," he said, his voice strained. "No pulse. I'm starting CPR." He tilted my head back and began chest compressions while Jessica called for emergency services on her cell phone. I could see the panic in their eyes, the desperate way they worked to revive me. "Come on, Lily. Stay with us," the man muttered as he continued compressions. But I wasn't really there anymore. As I watched them work on my body, I noticed something strange happening. A silver cord, there's no other way to describe it, seemed to connect me to my physical form. It was thinning, stretching, becoming more transparent by the second. And then, with a sensation like a rubber band finally snapping after being stretched too far, the cord broke. In that instant, I knew with absolute certainty I had died. Yet instead of darkness, instead of nothingness, I was still aware, still conscious, still me, but without a physical body. A strange force began pulling me upward, away from the scene below. As I ascended, I could see more of the stables, the parking lot where ambulances were now arriving, the barn where other horses were being calmed by their handlers, even my own car parked near the entrance with my water bottle still in the cup holder where I'd left it just an hour before. Everything looked both familiar and different, as if I was seeing the world through new eyes. Colors were more vibrant, details sharper. I could perceive things I never would have noticed before. The individual fibers in the paramedics' uniforms, the unique pattern of each horse's breathing, even the electrical signals running through the power lines nearby. As I rose higher, the scene below grew smaller. The stables, the trees, the roads, all of it receded until it was no more than a speck. And then, something changed. The world I knew disappeared entirely, and I found myself being pulled toward something else, a tunnel of some kind, stretching out before me. The tunnel wasn't dark as I might have expected. Instead, it was filled with a soft, pulsing light that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. The walls, if you could call them walls, weren't solid. They appeared almost like flowing fabric, constantly moving and shifting, yet somehow maintaining their tunnel-like shape. I wasn't walking or flying through this tunnel so much as being gently pulled along by a force I couldn't see but could definitely feel. It was like being carried by a current in a river, except there was no water, no wetness, no physical sensation as we understand it in the physical world. As I moved deeper into the tunnel, I became aware of sounds. Not the harsh, jarring sounds of the physical world, but something more like music. It wasn't quite a melody you could hum, more like harmonies that seemed to resonate with something deep inside me. I wasn't afraid. That's what surprises me most when I look back on it now. I had just died, just left my body behind, and yet I felt no fear. Instead, I felt a profound sense of peace, of rightness, as if I was exactly where I was supposed to be. The tunnel seemed to go on forever, and yet I had no sense of time passing. I could have been traveling for seconds or centuries. It all felt the same. In the physical world, I now know I was clinically dead for 12 minutes and 52 seconds. But in that tunnel, in that space between worlds, time had no meaning. As I continued forward, the light grew stronger, more intense. It wasn't blinding, though. Somehow, my non-physical eyes could perceive it without pain or discomfort. The light seemed to call to me, to welcome me, and I felt drawn to it with an almost magnetic pull. Then, suddenly, the tunnel opened up, and I emerged into a place unlike anything I had ever seen before. I found myself in what I can only describe as a vast, limitless space filled with the same light I had seen in the tunnel, but even more brilliant, more alive. The light wasn't just around me. It was within me too, flowing through whatever form I now had. The first thing that struck me was the sense of homecoming. I had never been here before, at least not in my current life, and yet something in me recognized this place, knew it intimately. It was like returning to a childhood home you haven't seen in decades, but still remember in your bones. I'm home, I thought, and as soon as the thought formed, I felt a response. Not in words, but in a wave of affirmation and welcome that washed over me. The space around me began to take shape, not solidifying exactly, but becoming more defined. I perceived what looked like rolling meadows of the most vibrant green, stretching out in all directions under a sky of the deepest, most perfect blue. But these weren't physical meadows or physical skies. They were something more, something beyond physical reality that my mind was interpreting in familiar forms to help me comprehend what I was experiencing. In the distance, I could see what appeared to be mountains of breathtaking beauty, and between them and me, a vast garden filled with flowers and colors I had never seen before, colors that don't exist in our physical spectrum. A gentle breeze, though not a physical breeze as we know it, seemed to carry the most exquisite fragrances, again unlike anything I had ever experienced on Earth. And then I realized I wasn't alone. At first, I sensed rather than saw them, presences, beings of light surrounding me. As I focused on them, they became clearer, taking on more definite forms. Some appeared as brilliant orbs of light, others as luminous, vaguely human-shaped figures. They communicated with me, not through spoken words, but through thoughts and feelings that I somehow understood perfectly. "Welcome, Lily," they seemed to say, their greeting filling me with warmth and joy. I felt no judgment from them, no criticism, only unconditional love and acceptance. It was as if they knew everything about me, every flaw, every mistake, every secret thought, and loved me completely anyway. In their presence, all shame, all fear, all doubt simply melted away. One presence in particular seemed familiar, drawing closer to me. As it approached, it began to take on a more defined form, and I recognized him. My grandfather, John Smith, who had died when I was 12 years old. He didn't look exactly as he had in life. He appeared younger, healthier, free from the cancer that had ravaged his body in his final months. But I knew him instantly. His essence, his spirit, was unmistakable. "Grandpa?" I couldn't speak as we understand speech, but my thought reached him. "Hello, little flower." That had been his nickname for me since I was small. No one else ever called me that. Joy surged through me, a joy so intense it would have brought me to my knees if I'd still had physical knees. My grandfather had been my hero, my confidant, my safe harbor during the tumultuous years of my parents' divorce. Losing him had been the greatest grief of my young life. And yet here he was, radiantly alive, more present and real than he had ever been in physical form. "How is this possible?" I asked, not with words, but with my whole being. "All things are possible with him," my grandfather replied, and somehow I knew he meant God. "You'll understand soon enough." He reached out, not with a physical hand, but with his essence, and I felt his love envelop me like the warmest embrace. In that moment, I knew with absolute certainty that death was not the end, that the connections we form in life continue beyond the physical realm. "Am I really dead?" I asked, though even as I formed the question, it seemed oddly irrelevant. "Your body has stopped for now," my grandfather explained, "but you have never been more alive than you are at this moment." Before I could ask more questions, my attention was drawn to another presence, one so magnificent, so powerful that all other presences, even the brilliance of my grandfather, seemed to dim in comparison. The light from this being was different, purer, stronger, more fundamental somehow, as if all other light was merely a reflection of this original source. As this presence drew nearer, I felt myself being filled with the most profound love I had ever experienced. A love so complete, so perfect, that it seemed to reach into the deepest parts of my being and heal wounds I hadn't even known were there. And I knew, with a certainty beyond any doubt, that I was in the presence of Jesus Christ. I couldn't see Jesus in the way we typically think of seeing, with physical eyes perceiving a physical form. Instead, I perceived his presence with my entire being, sensing rather than seeing. Yet what I perceived was more real, more substantial than anything I had ever experienced with my physical senses. If I were to try to describe his appearance, I would say he was light. But not just light as we know it. He was living light, conscious light. Light that knew me and loved me more perfectly than anyone ever had or could. His presence radiated a warmth that penetrated to my very core. As he drew near, I felt no fear, only an overwhelming sense of being known and loved completely. I felt like a child who had been lost in a crowd suddenly finding their parent, relief, joy, and the deep certainty of belonging. Then he communicated with me. I didn't hear his voice with ears, but his thoughts, his words, resonated within me with perfect clarity. "Lily," he said, and my name in his thoughts carried the weight of infinite understanding and love. I couldn't speak. What does one say in the presence of the divine? But he understood my silence, my awe, my overwhelming emotion. "Do not be afraid," he continued. "You are precious to me." Those simple words broke something open inside me, a dam I hadn't known was there. All my doubts, my fears, my regrets seemed to pour out of me, not in words, but in pure emotion. Why hadn't I believed more strongly? Why had I questioned? Why had I spent so much time on things that now seemed so trivial, so meaningless? But instead of judgment or disappointment, I felt only compassion from him, only understanding and mercy. "I have always been with you," he told me. "Even in your moments of doubt, even when you couldn't feel my presence." And suddenly I could see it. Moments throughout my life when I had felt alone but hadn't been. Times of struggle when unseen hands had guided me. Instances of coincidence that had actually been divine intervention. He had been there all along, watching over me, loving me, guiding me when I allowed it. "Lord," I managed at last. I never truly understood. I tried to believe, but "Faith is a journey," he replied, "not a destination. You were finding your way to me, step by step." Then something extraordinary happened. Jesus showed me my life, not in a linear progression of events, but all at once, as if I could see every moment simultaneously. But I wasn't just observing these moments. I was reliving them, experiencing them from multiple perspectives. It began with my earliest memories, being cradled in my mother's arms, taking my first steps, my father's proud smile as I rode my bike without training wheels for the first time. But I wasn't just seeing these events from my perspective. I was also experiencing how others had felt in those moments. I felt my mother's fierce love and protection as she held me, her wonder at the miracle of new life. I felt my father's mixture of pride and anxiety as he let go of the bike, hoping I wouldn't fall, but knowing I needed to learn independence. The review continued through my childhood, my awkward teenage years, into adulthood. Every significant moment, every choice, every relationship was laid bare, not for judgment, but for understanding. I saw the times I had shown kindness, the elderly woman I had helped across the street, the stray dog I had fed and taken to a shelter, the friend whose tears I had dried after her breakup. In each instance, I felt not only my own emotions, but theirs as well. The elderly woman's gratitude, the dog's trust and relief, my friend's comfort in knowing she wasn't alone. But I also saw the times I had caused hurt. The harsh words spoken in anger to my mother, the gossip I had spread about a coworker, the homeless man I had ignored when he asked for spare change. I felt my mother's pain at my rejection, my coworker's humiliation when the rumors reached her, the homeless man's despair at being treated as invisible. These moments were not shown to shame me, but to teach me. I understood with perfect clarity that every action, every word, every thought affects not only ourselves but others in ways we cannot always see or understand. The ripples of our choices extend far beyond what we perceive in the physical world. This is why love is the greatest commandment, Jesus explained as I experienced these moments. When you love others as yourself, when you treat them with compassion and kindness, you are participating in the divine nature. You are reflecting my love into the world. I saw how even my smallest acts of kindness had created waves of positive energy that continued long after the initial action. A compliment I had given to a struggling coworker had given her the confidence to apply for a promotion. She got the job, which allowed her to move her family to a better neighborhood, which changed the trajectory of her children's lives. Conversely, I saw how my more selfish choices had created negative ripples. The time I had chosen not to volunteer at a community event because I was too tired had meant one less pair of hands, which had increased the burden on the other volunteers, which had led to a less successful outcome for the entire community. All of it matters, Jesus told me. Every choice, every action, every thought. Not because I stand in judgment, but because you are connected to every other soul in ways you cannot fully comprehend while in physical form. As the life review continued, I began to see patterns emerge. Times when I had grown spiritually, times when I had stagnated or regressed. I saw how certain challenges that had seemed cruel or unfair at the time had actually been opportunities for growth, for developing greater compassion, resilience, or wisdom. Suffering has purpose, Jesus explained, sensing my questions before I could form them. Not because I wish it upon you, but because in a fallen world, suffering is sometimes the fastest path to spiritual growth. The soul learns compassion through experiencing pain, learns gratitude through experiencing loss, learns strength through experiencing weakness. I understood then why bad things happen to good people, not because God causes suffering, but because He can use it, transform it, redeem it for greater purpose. Every tear shed in the physical world is known to Him, every cry of pain heard and held in His heart. The life review wasn't limited to my own direct experiences. I also saw the impact of my ancestors' choices on my life, the faith of my grandparents that had been passed down through generations, the wounds my parents had carried from their own childhoods that had affected how they raised me, the cultural and historical circumstances that had shaped my opportunities and challenges. You are part of a greater story, Jesus explained. Each soul's journey is unique, yet connected to all others. No one walks alone, even when it seems that way. As the life review began to slow, focusing now on my most recent years, I saw something that surprised me. Moments when I had almost glimpsed the greater reality I was now experiencing. Times in prayer or meditation when the veil had thinned. Moments in nature when I had felt a connection to something greater than myself. Instances of synchronicity that had hinted at a more interconnected universe than I had recognized. You were beginning to awaken, Jesus told me. Your soul was preparing for deeper understanding. The review ended with the moments just before my accident, my joy in the beautiful autumn day, my connection with Artemis, my complete unawareness that these would be my final moments in physical form. I saw my death not as a tragedy but as a transition, a doorway from one state of being to another. When the life review was complete, I felt changed, humbled yet elevated, more aware of my own failings yet more accepting of them, more conscious of the impact of my choices, yet more assured of divine mercy and grace. Do you understand now? Jesus asked. I'm beginning to, I replied, though I knew my understanding was still limited compared to the vast wisdom surrounding me. Then Jesus did something unexpected. He showed me not just my past, but glimpses of the future. Not my personal future, but the future of those I loved and of humanity as a whole. What I am about to show you, Jesus said, few are permitted to see, but you must return with this knowledge, though many will doubt your words. In an instant, I was shown visions so profound, so overwhelming, that my non-physical being trembled with the weight of them. I saw the immediate aftermath of my accident, the paramedics working desperately to revive me, my family rushing to the hospital, friends gathering to pray. I saw my mother collapsed in grief in the hospital waiting room, my father pacing with red-rimmed eyes, both of them united in their fear of losing me despite years of bitter divorce. Then the perspective widened, and I saw beyond my personal connections to the state of humanity as a whole. I saw the spiritual battle being waged on Earth, not with physical weapons, but with ideas, beliefs, values, and choices. I saw forces of light and darkness competing for the souls of humankind. This is the true nature of the struggle, Jesus explained. Not flesh against flesh, but spirit against spirit. The physical conflicts you see in the world are merely reflections of a deeper spiritual reality. I saw how easily people were deceived, how they chased after things that could never satisfy the deepest longings of their souls: money, power, pleasure, fame. I saw how these pursuits left them empty, always hungry for more, never finding true peace. They seek living water from broken cisterns, Jesus said, echoing the prophet Jeremiah. They look for fulfillment in everything except the one who created them to be fulfilled in him. I saw the consequences of humanity turning away from divine truth, not divine punishment, but the natural result of choices made in opposition to the principles that govern spiritual reality. Just as ignoring physical laws like gravity leads to physical harm, ignoring spiritual laws leads to spiritual harm. I do not wish this suffering upon them, Jesus said, his love for humanity radiating from him with such intensity that it brought me to tears. But I have given them free will, the freedom to choose. Without that freedom, love cannot exist. And I desire their love freely given, not compelled. Then I was shown something that shocked me, the reality of evil. Not just human wrongdoing, but conscious, intelligent spiritual forces that actively worked against divine goodness. I saw how these forces influenced human thinking, exploited weaknesses, magnified fears, and distorted truth. The enemy is real, Jesus said, but his power is limited and his defeat is certain. Do not fear him, but do not ignore his reality. Many in your time deny his existence, which only increases his influence. I was then shown the future, not in specific events or dates, but in spiritual trends and currents. I saw a time of increasing polarization, where the distinction between light and darkness, truth and falsehood, would become more stark, forcing people to choose sides with greater clarity. The lukewarm time is ending, Jesus explained. The time of sitting on fences, of spiritual compromise, is drawing to a close. Each soul will be called to decide whom they will serve. But along with this sobering vision came one of hope. I saw a great awakening beginning to stir, souls turning back to divine truth, communities being transformed by rediscovered faith. I saw the power of simple obedience, how ordinary people living according to divine principles could change the atmosphere around them. My people will shine like stars in the darkness, Jesus said. Their light will draw others who hunger for truth. I saw how seemingly small acts of faith and obedience could have enormous spiritual impact. A mother praying over her children, a businessman conducting his affairs with integrity, a teenager standing firm against peer pressure, a pastor faithfully teaching truth without compromise. Jesus told me, "The world measures greatness by what can be seen. But in my kingdom, greatness is often found in what remains hidden, the prayer offered in secret, the temptation resisted when no one is watching, the sacrifice made without recognition." Then Jesus showed me something that brought me to my knees, though I had no physical knees, his love for each individual soul. I saw how he knew every person intimately, how he pursued them, how he worked in their lives even when they were unaware of his presence. I saw his grief when they turned away from him, his joy when they turned toward him. "Tell them I love them," he said, his voice filled with an emotion beyond anything I could fully comprehend. Tell them I am real, that I am near, that I see their struggles and their pain. Tell them I have not abandoned this world, though it often seems that way. Tell them I am coming back, and sooner than they think. As these revelations flowed into me, I felt both exhilarated and overwhelmed. How could I possibly remember all of this, let alone communicate it? How could words capture what I was experiencing? "Do not worry," Jesus assured me, knowing my thoughts. "The Spirit will bring to your remembrance what you need to share. Not all of what you have seen is for everyone to hear, but speak what the Spirit prompts, when He prompts." Then, with infinite tenderness, Jesus told me something that stopped my thoughts entirely. "It is not yet your time, Lily. You must go back." Go back? The idea seemed impossible, unbearable. How could I leave this place of perfect love, perfect understanding, perfect peace? How could I return to the limitations of physical existence after experiencing such freedom? But why? I asked, feeling something like grief for the first time since arriving in this realm. "Why send me back?" "Because your work is not finished," Jesus answered, his compassion surrounding me like an embrace. "There are things for you to do, people for you to reach, a testimony for you to share that only you can give." I wanted to argue, to plead, to negotiate, but in his presence, I understood that his perspective was infinitely wider than mine, his wisdom infinitely deeper. If he said I needed to go back, then there was purpose in it, meaning beyond what I could currently comprehend. "Will I remember all of this?" I asked, worried that the profound truths I had learned would slip away when I returned to my physical brain with all its limitations. "You will remember what you need to remember," Jesus told me. "Some things will be clear immediately, others will return to you over time, as you are ready to receive them." The truth was, part of me did want to go back, to see my family again, to tell them what I had experienced, to live differently with the knowledge I now possessed. But another part of me was afraid of the pain, the limitations, the frustrations of physical existence. "I will be with you always," Jesus promised, reading my conflicted thoughts. "Even to the end of the age. You have always been mine, Lily, even when you didn't fully know it. And now you go back as my witness." With those words, I felt a shift, a gentle pulling away from this realm of light and love. My grandfather approached once more, his presence wrapping around me in a final embrace. "Tell your grandmother I'm waiting for her," he said. "Tell her not to fear the crossing. I'll be here to meet her when her time comes, just as I was here for you." I wanted to stay with him longer, to ask him questions, to simply be in his presence, but the pulling sensation grew stronger. "Go with grace, little flower," he said, using his nickname for me one last time. "Live well, love deeply, remember what you've seen." The light began to recede, or perhaps I was the one moving away from it. The tunnel reappeared, but this time I was traveling in the opposite direction, being pulled back toward the physical realm. As I moved, I felt myself becoming heavier, more confined. The unlimited awareness I had experienced began to narrow, focusing down into a more limited perspective. Sensations began to return: pain, pressure, the heaviness of a physical body. There was a moment of resistance, a hesitation at the threshold between realms. Then, with what felt like a great rushing of wind, I was back in my broken body, back in the physical world with all its limitations and pain. The first thing I became aware of was the pain, intense, all-encompassing pain radiating from my head throughout my entire body. Then came the sounds: beeping machines, urgent voices, the squeak of rubber-soled shoes on linoleum. "We've got a rhythm!" someone shouted. "She's back!" I tried to open my eyes but couldn't. I tried to speak but found a tube down my throat. I was paralyzed, trapped in a body that wouldn't respond to my commands. Panic began to rise within me. After the freedom I had just experienced, this paralysis was terrifying. But then I remembered Jesus' words, "I will be with you always." I focused on that promise, clinging to it like a lifeline as the medical team worked frantically around me. Gradually, I became aware of a hand holding mine. My mother's hand, I somehow knew. I couldn't squeeze back, couldn't give any sign that I knew she was there, but I felt her presence and took comfort in it. Time passed. I'm not sure how much. I drifted in and out of consciousness, the pain sometimes receding under the influence of medication, sometimes returning with brutal force. But through it all, I held on to what I had seen, what I had learned, refusing to let it slip away. And then, finally, I opened my eyes. The first face I saw was my mother's, her eyes red-rimmed from crying, her face pale with worry. When she realized I was awake, her expression transformed into one of such profound relief and joy that it brought tears to my eyes. "Lily," she whispered, her voice breaking. "You're back. Oh God, you're back." I tried to speak but couldn't. The breathing tube was still in place. Frustration washed over me. I had so much to tell her, so much to share, and I couldn't speak a word. I've been unconscious for 3 days. It had felt like both an eternity and an instant on the other side. "You're very lucky to be alive," the doctor said. "When they brought you in, you had no pulse, no respiration. The paramedics performed CPR for almost 13 minutes before they got you back." As the doctor continued his examination, I heard him murmur to a nurse, "It's remarkable. Given the severity of the injury and the length of time without oxygen, I would have expected significant brain damage. But her responses are better than we could have hoped for." Over the next few hours, as my condition stabilized, they removed the breathing tube. My throat was raw, my voice a raspy whisper, but I could finally speak. "Mom," I croaked, the word painful but necessary. "I have to tell you something." She leaned closer, stroking my hair gently, careful to avoid the bandages. "What is it, sweetheart? What do you need?" "I died," I said simply. "I died, and I saw Jesus." My mother stiffened slightly, concern crossing her face. "Lily, you've been through a traumatic experience. The brain can create all sorts of—" "No," I interrupted, with more strength than I thought I possessed. "It wasn't a hallucination. It wasn't my brain creating comfort scenarios. It was real, Mom." "Grandpa John was there," I said, watching her expression carefully. "He called me Little Flower." "No one else ever called me that, Mom. How would I know that if I hadn't seen him?" "He told me to tell you something." She sat down heavily on the edge of the bed, her skepticism beginning to crack. "What did he say?" "He said to tell Grandma that he's waiting for her and that she shouldn't fear the crossing. He'll be there to meet her when her time comes, just as he was there for me." Tears filled my mother's eyes. "That sounds like something he would say," she whispered. Over the next hours and days, as my strength gradually returned, I shared more of what I had experienced. The medical team was similarly skeptical. When I tried to tell Dr. Chen about my experience, he smiled kindly but dismissively. Many patients report unusual experiences during periods of unconsciousness,